Today on our Tech for Business podcast, Todd, our COO and CISO, and Nate, our Director of Cybersecurity, are joining us again. And we're talking critical infrastructure and its relationship to cybersecurity, of course, because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I hate to throw Todd a curveball, but could you talk a little bit about why this matters to our listeners who are probably private business owners and leaders?
Sure. Just to level set and make sure that we're all talking the same language. And even though when I say we're all, it's just the three of us, but so everybody's with us. Critical infrastructure historically has been water systems, transportation, healthcare, financial institutions, electrical, those kinds of things. If you go in the Wayback Machine to a whopping 5 years ago when we had the pandemic, most organizations had some level of criticality to them. I don't know if anybody remembers, but I'll just do a quick overview. Is you couldn't travel in a lot of states unless you had the ability to say, yes, I am critical and I have to do my job to keep the world running. So even though technically somebody like a CIT is not considered critical infrastructure, we were ensuring healthcare, banks, et cetera, were all up and running during that time frame. So the view of that is very broad. And so the reason why I mention it is because there's a lot of people that impact it. We've talked in the past about security and the supply chain. Depending on how you view yourself, you probably fall into the supply chain in some shape, manner, or form. But even more broadly than that, these things do impact our day-to-day lives, right? Everybody just assumes you're going to have electricity when there's a storm and it goes out. It's incredibly disruptive to our lives. You assume you're going to have clean water. You assume that when you go to the hospital, everything's going to be up and running and all the life support's available and so forth. So from the day-to-day monotony of making sure that our businesses run to the day-to-day critical assets of making sure that our lives are healthy and safe, this potentially has a massive widespread impact across the entire nation.
Yeah, if you are interested of identifying whether or not you are part of the critical infrastructure that we are talking about, the CISA, or the Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency, they actually have a link on their website. I'm sure we can put it in the show notes, is how to identify, here's the 16 different critical infrastructure categories. And so things like there's critical infrastructure for manufacturing. It's not all manufacturing, but if you're manufacturing things for like the energy industry or the transportation systems, that type of stuff, right? So you can go to their website, identify whether or not you are critical infrastructure. But I think one of the big things as well is, so getting back to your question, Ariel, is the why, right? I am a private business owner. I am not running the transformers on the grid. If those were to ever be a target and they break or something, guess who they're going to call to manufacture more transformers for the grid, right? It's going to be you. Same with healthcare and everything like that. Is what right now, leading into this, we're talking about cyber domain and warfare and stuff. So that's right where my mind goes to right now. Hospitals, right? Cyber warfare. We know that sometimes hospitals are a target of war. And so there's components of the resiliency to ensure patient care and everything like that. That's why cybersecurity is so critical, even if you sometimes don't believe it to be.
It seems like a silly question to ask why it's a target, because I feel like we can understand why critical infrastructure is a target. So what really are some of those major weaknesses that we see in critical infrastructure?
Yeah. I'm going to kind of, again, pull the lens back from just the federal definitions of these critical infrastructures and bring it back a little bit more to the local SMB market here. Is cybersecurity is truly built on the foundations of best practices, right? There are components to this, such as, do you have strong passwords? Are you doing things like multifactor? Are you regularly patching your systems and keeping them up to date? Are you doing security awareness training? These are the things that the common language that CIT will use is, these are the considered as non-negotiables. These are the things that you must do at a minimum And the reason why are that is the foundational layer to security. If you can't block and tackle the basics, you will not start to get up into the more advanced upper echelons of security. Or even if you do push towards that, a threat actor is always going to start off at the foundation and try and work their way in, right? So don't put all the eggs in the basket of these advanced tools when you can't block and tackle the basics.
Yeah, expanding on it as some of the threats and whatnot are, again, I'm going to keep a more of a local lens on this, but the comments do go across the board. We see in a lot of the critical infrastructure, and that could be anything, the stuff that we talked about, or it could be cities, counties, PD departments, all that'd be police departments. Sorry, I'll try not to do too many acronyms, but it could be all of those things. And we often see that organizations, because they have, and I'm going to use a little bit of the cliche of saying IT debt, where they've got these legacy systems in place, the architecture is a bit older, et cetera, they're inherently less secure than they could be. And so those tend to be a lot of the threats. You see this in manufacturing too, is in manufacturing, and again, I'll say critical infrastructure like electricity, water, et cetera. A lot of the infrastructure that's physically there is very old. It was very expensive to put in place, and it does not get the updates on a normal organization would be doing with their laptops and desktops. It's pretty easy to see when that's legacy, when somebody's using it day in and day out. But when it's something like in a power plant, it's a lot harder to keep eyes on it and going, hey, that thing is 20 years old. We need to do something about it. But because it's so legacy, it is not inherently keeping up with the security standards of they are today. That doesn't mean you can't protect them, but it does create a threat that adds to the concerns of what's going on. And again, kind of going more local, as I said, whether that's a police department or even your own homes, most people have stuff in there. I mean, my mom we recently replaced it. Don't hack my mom. She had a laptop that was like 15 years old. And I was like, we got to replace that thing. I can't even believe you can use it, to be honest with you. But those people have those in their houses where it's working well enough. All I'm doing is doing bubble breaker on the computer. And so who cares? But the reality is you tend to have things on there like tax files and all kinds of other stuff that is old and legacy and does cause you to have some weaknesses in there. But really, as Nate said, is the blocking and tackling is where we see the vast majority of where people have weaknesses, for use of passwords, those kinds of things, training and so forth.
I have to touch on the password component because there's a list out on the internet of the top 100 bad passwords. And you can go look back for every year what was identified as the weakest passwords out there. It is the same like top 10 bad passwords year after year, right? It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 password, or any iteration of those types of passwords. So the problem is that we have this education is, to be honest, I don't expect to change anything. I'm here to educate and remind, but because we see that the top 10 passwords are the same bad passwords for the last 10 years, what that means is it's not the education that's the issue. It's our own internal desires and motives to actually make the change and be the people that are going to truly drive forward and protect ourselves and our businesses and everything like that. When you take a listen to this, reflect on it and go, is Nate just blowing smoke and Todd is blowing smoke and this is the end of the podcast because I'm not going to do anything with this anyways? Or is this the time to kind of make that wake-up call and go change the password? So maybe I hope that next year we see some different passwords on that list, but
yeah, it was
real low on that one, but I hope that it motivated one more person.
Yeah, I was going to say, we know these are out there. And I was waiting for Nate to say one of the bad passwords is I love you. And I was waiting for that to come out so I could make a snarky joke about it, but he didn't do it. But if we're going to throw a little fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there and hope this isn't true, but I'm just going to joke and say, if I'm calling out your password, it's time to change it, right? So the bad ones are, like you said, their password, they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And people, I think, tend to think they're very clever. So they start using QWERTY 1, 2, 3, those kinds of things. The one that's supposed to be clever is, it's a combination of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and QWERTY. So it's 1, Q, 2, W. You get the idea. Welcome, let me in, 5555. All of those are bad. If you're using those, it's time. Here's your wake-up call. I know your password.
Oh my gosh. Yes, maybe you can stop, pause, go change your password, and then go back. I love it. I want to go back.
Don't change it to your pet's name or your kid's name either.
Yes, for sure. I want to go back to these legacy systems that you're talking about because this can affect, we're talking about critical infrastructure, but it can also affect businesses that have legacy systems. How do you approach, this is a tangent, how do you approach the idea of like patching what you have or like a full replace situation? Like, how are you approaching those
I
out of date
I got a quick,
systems?
hit my it depends in, so it depends. Moving on.
I set you up.
You did. I appreciate it. The answer does vary by organization, threat, et cetera. And I'll just give an example. I was working with a manufacturer that had an old legacy piece of equipment that was in their plant that it was over 20 years old. And what we ended up deciding to do was we just took it off the network, and I literally took it off the network. So unplugged it from the wall. It was standalone. It did not need an internet connection to do its day-to-day work. So that was how we mitigated the threats for that. When we had to do updates and whatnot, we would set up an independent internet connection. That was the only thing it was connected to. So think cell phone as an example. And then we would update it and then move it off. But things like that make sense, right? So what I'm doing there is I'm giving a very extreme example of what we would refer to as segmenting your network. And if you go back to the old target attack, really what was happening was they were coming through the HVAC system and getting into the main network and moving from there. And that was when segmenting the network became part of this is the blocking and tackling. This is the non-negotiable stuff that organizations need to do. And that's what with like police departments that also most cities will have things such as administration, police departments, libraries. Sometimes they have municipalities with liquor and whatnot as well. And those end up being needed to be segmented so you don't have that. So those are just a couple of examples. Yes, it's great if you can patch them, but when you get into old legacy stuff, the patches are far and few between.
Yeah, my mind instantly went to segmentation as well. So a little more kind of colors. I came from a manufacturing background as well. We work with plenty of manufacturing organizations. And the problem is that there's usually automation systems tied to those legacy systems, right? And they are very costly to try and replace. So when we are looking at some examples, one of the automation systems for one of the customers we were working at, we said, hey, you have Windows 7, right? This is the end of life. We should start taking a look at trying to replace this. I said, I hear you. I want to get rid of it just as bad as you. I have 8 of these Windows 7 systems. Do you know how much it costs for me to actually replace that with a modern system? $1.25 million per system, because the entire automation system is built into it, has to go through its certifications and usability and reliability testing. It will cost me, again, $1 million to replace these. We're not talking about just pulling it off the shelf, reimaging it, and putting it back in, because in manufacturing, and I know we're touching deeply on manufacturing right now, is those systems are what makes the organization money, right? And same if it were talking healthcare, right? Is those are used to save lives. You cannot just swap it out and say, I hope there's no bugs in it. These have to be perfectly reliable systems, and that takes a lot of time to validate and certify and maintain consistency. So when you are facing those instances, the best thing you can do is starting to segment it, like Todd had mentioned, is, okay, rather than giving everyone access, maybe it's just the medical device network or just the ones that need to talk to each other. And so that's really where we get into those topics of microsegmentation, is only allowed network connections in your environment should be able to make those connections. Anything that's unnecessary should be blocked by default. So that sounds like it could be really difficult. It's work. I will not rule that out. But I don't think it's as hard as many organizations believe it to be. And the cost to do that is significantly less than maybe the $10 million to just replace the system.
Yeah, agreed. There are other ways too. So like most thing in cybersecurity, there's a bit of a roadmap. There's a maturity that you go through as you get more and more finite. As organizations go through this, Nate's kind of highlighting this extremely well, is you start to do we would call it like a business impact analysis. But really what you're doing is you're trying to decide what the risk is and whether the juice is worth the squeeze, if you will. So in the case that he just illustrated, is it worth $10 million to reduce this risk, or I can do this other control that is significantly less? Now I've got that control in, I still have risk. Can I further reduce it? And the answer is yes. So as an example, you can restrict what has access to that, whether that's devices, addressing through IPs, people, et cetera, et cetera. So the more mature you get, the tighter you can get those controls. And as he mentioned, it does tend to be work, but the more you go through this, the more risk you'll reduce and the more secure you'll become. But again, blocking and tackling is where we're focusing today. So I won't get too terribly far into the weeds on those items.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit with these critical systems, that budget is a huge barrier. You mentioned that with these legacy systems and how you approach that. What are some other kind of barriers that people are butting up against when it comes to improving their security?
He's waiting, so I'll go. Yeah, culture's one good one.
Culture.
I'll wait. Go ahead, Nate. I have one too that wasn't culture.
Perfect. So with cybersecurity, I believe that most people at this point are okay with things like multifactor, right? Is your bank requires it, your email likely requires it. But multifactor 5 years ago was a cultural shift and people really fought about it. But when we're starting to talk about this like microsegmentation and other components, security training, everyone hates phishing training, right? But these are the things that it does take time to shift the culture on. We'll go into too many other tools right now, but there's some that continue to put the pressure on the end users in the environment or the IT administrators, right? IT admins often love to just run and get the job done, right? They're under a pressure to get systems back up and they've got a lot to do. They're typically overworked. So when you put in these controls, then they might, like, I like to say it's like the door, right? Did you run face first into the door because you forgot the door was there, right? It sometimes hurts. Remember that you have to open the door first and then you can walk through it. So those are the cases where you have to remember that, hey, I started closing my door behind every room as I'm walking out. Remember to open it up. And it's a mental shift that you have to do. And those are the things, especially in these legacy systems, they're so used to them being so open that when you start locking them down, it's a little challenging to make that shift after 20 years of the same thing.
I don't have a door analogy. I thought that was amazing, but I don't. Mine actually was going to be the unknowns, and that tends to sound incredibly great. Wonder what do I do with the unknowns? But what I'm saying, it tends to be more along the lines of things that you probably should be able to find a way to figure out. So, for example, a lot of organizations may not have a very good inventory of their assets. They may not know certain things are on their network. That type of thing. And there are plenty of tools that will allow you to go out and see what is actually there. Once you know what's there, you have the ability to protect them and build a plan around it. But there are other types of unknowns too. And another one that I would go, again, maturity wise, that most organizations may or may not have their arms around just yet, goes back to supply chain. So as an example, and this is going to be, I don't want to freak anybody out, but just to kind of highlight what I'm getting at is organizations that are starting to put tools inside their networks, whether they know it or not, they almost all currently are putting some sort of AI in there. And if you're not aware of that, again, you can't defend against it. Is it getting access to certain things? Do I need to restrict it from being able to get places, et cetera? Those unknowns tend to be problematic as well. And again, just fully understanding what's happening on your network is absolutely critical.
Sure. As we get to the end, we mentioned MFA, password, segmentation, culture. Is there anything else practical advice you want to make sure to highlight for people who are maybe dealing with legacy systems or find themselves directly connected to critical infrastructure?
Yeah. I think one of the things I would start off with, because my mind instantly goes to, I know there's products to try and help with microsegmentation and gain the initial visibility into that if you don't already have it. But something completely free that you can do today, build out a data flow diagram for where your critical data is connected to and where it's going to. It's one where Oftentimes we see network administrators build a network architecture diagram, which is where the physical systems are interconnected. But what's often lacking is a data flow diagram of how the information flows. I'm not going to go into too much compliance stuff. In the HIPAA proposed rules that are changes, this is one of the upcoming requirements. But when we're talking about even things such as the critical infrastructure is your industrial control system is sending data. Maybe it's between a laser and a sensor, and there's like a SQL, it's like a database that's being written to be able to store values of where the machines are positioned, everything like that. Is you need to know how the data is flowing through your environment, because then when we start talking about these micro-segmentations or network segmentation, you can come into that a little bit more confidently to say, yeah, I already know where everything's going. Here's the systems that need to talk to each other, and let's build a plan around it. So even before we're getting to the product, the plan.
That was what I was going to add too, was slightly different. I was going down the, again, relatively free, if you will, aside from people's time, is you should have an incident response plan. You should be able to use what Nate just highlighted about your data flows, knowing that if data needs to flow here and there and is part of the critical portions of your business, what would you do in the event something stops that flow? And so building an incident response plan helps you do that. And it's part of your continuity planning anyway. So mine are basically part 1 and part 2. One is you got to have a plan, and part 2 is you got to make sure that you have the ability to recover, which is your BCP planning as well.
That seems like a great place to stop. I think we have some podcasts about those other items, and we have podcasts coming up about culture and more security tips. So thanks so much, Todd and Nate, for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this topic, please let us know. Like, subscribe, or reach out to us at info@cit-net.com or head out to our website, cit-net.com/podcast. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.